Ladies, gentlemen, and adventurers of all ages, it may be 2025, but 2023 is still coming back to give us even more beautiful gems in the video gaming world. Baldurs Gate 3 had its full release over a year and a half ago, and in that time, there have been a ton of updates to the game, including better modding compatibility just across the board to let the community itself run absolutely wild with the game, even on consoles, but also keeping their promise of meaningful, long-term live service additions to the game without further pay gates to get into it. The latest of these updates is currently still in the works. That said, currently update number 8 is undergoing a stress test that players can sign up for on the official Larian website if you're interested in its unfinished state. Otherwise, it'll be released into the wild when it's fully finished up, with current estimates being somewhere around the next couple of months, more than likely. That said, there's a ton coming into the game with this update, including a proper photo mode and crossplay to let you play the game with your friends, even if they are on different systems. But by far the biggest and most important part for the vast majority of people is that they are adding a whole new 12 subclasses to the game. One new one for each of the existing base classes. This is quite possibly the biggest shift in gameplay potential since the launch, and without a doubt there will be plenty of people wanting to play the game again with entire new subclasses throughout their party for their whole playthrough. So today let's have a look at all 12 new subclasses and sort of also rank them based on my thoughts on where they currently stand, mostly based on their power potential, but at least a little bit from cool factor as well. Of course, any and all of these will be capable of beating the game on any difficulty, but this ranking is more just what I view to be the best at mixing with the game as it is and the options it's been given. Starting off then, in dead last place, I got the new Bard subclass, the College of Glamour. And this is a shame as someone who does love bards and always has, but while the College of Glamour will allow for some creative and unique gameplay, as far as power it leaves a fair bit to be desired in my opinion. The main unique feature of the subclass is Mantle of Inspiration, which gives 2 allies 5 temporary hit points, and if an enemy uses a melee attack against any of them while this is active, they will be charmed, which then makes them vulnerable to Mantle of Majesty, which targets charmed enemies and lets you freely command them to move away, move closer, stop on the spot, disarm themselves, go prone, and this isn't necessarily the worst thing in concept, but in reality, because it specifically needs a melee attack to hit these temporary hit points, and it only gives you 5 temporary hit points as well, and if anything other than a melee attack takes away that HP, then the charm will just never actually trigger. This means even though conceptually this can offer a lot of control, it's very limited in actual use scenarios, because it can be completely ruined by even a single enemy not being melee in combat, though you can sort of awkwardly force interactions by causing attacks of opportunity against you through movement. On top of that, Mantle of Majesty is, in effect, a once per long rest use command spell as a bonus action, which again only applies to charmed enemies. For Bard, which already has really good subclass choices available to it, this one feels like the one with the lowest general potential of all the new stuff, hence the spot on this list. Next up then, in 11th place, I've got Rogue with the new Swashbuckler subclass. The pros, you get to be a goddamn pirate, you get dirty tricks, which are specific bonus actions, either disarming an enemy and gaining advantage against them, blinding them, or using Vicious Mockery as a bonus action too. As well, you get Fancy Footwork, which makes you immune to opportunity attacks against an enemy you attacked that turn, and Rakish Audacity, which gives you +1 initiative and gives you sneak attack even without advantage, but only if you don't have disadvantage too. This subclass best functions when sort of soloing off a single enemy and then working through them systematically, just sort of blinding them, disarming them, stabbing them, and then repositioning as needed without being attacked. And while matching beautifully for the sort of class fantasy of a swashbuckling pirate rogue, it does limit its potential in Baldurs Gate 3's combat scenarios. This one isn't necessarily actively bad by any means, it's just a bit funky to use, and isn't like definitively stronger than the other rogue subclass options either. Moving on then, let's talk about the fighter's new subclass, the Arcane Archer. The main benefit of this is the way it leans totally into ranged combat. This subclass gets a number of unique arrow shots that it can use as a part of the class abilities. Specifically, you get 6 archery charges per short rest, and you can use these charges for various arrow types. There's one that can apply Banish, one that can make enemies take damage when they move, one that is a guaranteed hit option so you can secure the kills that you really need to. There's one that can apply Blind, one that applies damage to everything in a line, piercing things, and again, this subclass has quite a lot of options to play around with. That said, 6 uses of an arrow per short rest is a little bit limiting for something that you could theoretically use multiple of in a single turn, and when talking about a fighter subclass, you do have to consider things like the Battlemaster that also exists, with options for ranged combat specialization too, but without pigeonholing you into only doing ranged combat, as there's also battle tactics for melee too within that subclass. Up then in 9th place, let's talk about the Ranger and the Swarmkeeper subclass, the new one for them. When you pick the subclass, you get one of 3 swarms of spirits you can choose to help you out: a legion of bees that deal piercing damage, push enemies around, or teleport you; a cloud of jellyfish that can deal lightning damage, shock enemies, enemies or teleport you, or a flurry of moths, which can deal psychic damage, blind enemies, or teleport you. As well, you get bonus damage from your swarm against enemies that have Hunter's Mark on them, and as you level further up, you get Writhing Tide, which lets you fly for short periods of time by being lifted up by your own swarm, with charges replenished on long rest. Overall, I'd say Swarmkeeper is one of the cooler ideas for a new class being added, a new class fantasy being very well met, honestly, within Update 8, and the general additions from the subclass itself are pretty solid. There's nothing bad, nothing feels incorrect, but nothing completely groundbreaking either, so it's in the lower middle of the pack, really. Next up then in 8th, we've got Monk and the Way of the Drunken Master subclass. This one I find to be incredibly interesting. It is a top tier concept as far as I'm concerned, and the main sort of linchpins that make it function are Intoxicating Strike, which is a key point cost action strike with a chance to make enemies drunk, which don't ask me how that makes sense logistically, but then this combined with Life of the Party, which is a passive you get at level 7 in the subclass, applies a buff to you whenever you successfully hit with Intoxicating Strike. It can stack with itself, but the buff itself gives you increased AC and increased to attack rolls against drunk targets. So you spend your key points making your enemies drunk by punching them, then you slowly gain power as more enemies get drunk long term. The main limitations of this, and why I have it where it is mostly that while it can be really powerful in some fight situations, and there's even gear that you could build around it, especially with it focusing on unarmed strikes, but overall it's too easy to blow through all of your key points, and it's heavily luck dependent on how many enemies you can make drunk through a fight, not to mention trying to sustain across multiple fights between rests. Moving up to 7th place then, we have the Cleric with the Death Domain subclass, and this is essentially just a heavily necromancy themed cleric option, as the name suggests. Fun sort of side note is that you can actually run Shadowheart with this domain while still being pretty lore accurate, as Death Domain is still fitting of a Cleric of Shar. But that aside, the first bonus to the subclass is Reaper. This makes any necromancy cantrip that targets only one creature able to affect an additional target. This is a relatively strong sort of marathon bonus, as this lets you essentially double effectiveness from your cantrips, making you far more effective outside of just using your spell slots themselves. Your channel divinity for this subclass is Touch of Death, which lets you apply bonus necrotic damage on melee hits, and then as you level further you gain the ability to ignore necrotic resistance with your spells, and then just get bonus necrotic damage once per turn on melee attack hits as well. Overall, this is a quite solid subclass. It's not absolutely crazy as far as how strong it is, but it definitely deserves its spot right around this point here in the midpoint of the list. Then in 6th place we have Paladin and the Oath of the Crown subclass. Class fantasy is on point with this one, and it's pretty much the highest potential for tankiness that you can get in melee, especially as a Paladin, and that in itself is why I've got it placed this high to begin with. But because in the majority of situations people care more about damage than anything else, something that excels at tankiness specifically has to have an upper limit in rankings. That said, you can taunt nearby enemies to make them have disadvantage against any target that isn't you. You can do a healing shout, and at higher levels you get Divine Allegiance to let you basically just force yourself to take damage instead of a nearby ally when they get hit, and the actual range of this is relatively short, but this can situationally save an ally's life, which in turn could swing an entire fight. Moving up to 5th place today then, we have the Shadow Magic Sorcerer. The main feature of this subclass then is the Hound of Ill Omen that you unlock at level 6. You get a little dog friend here from this, and he has two main purposes. Ominous Bite, its attack applies an omen to enemies of a random elemental type, and when you do that type of elemental damage to the target, you regain 1 sorcery point. This allows you to effectively cycle sorcery points rather than holding them for more important moments in meta magic, especially combined with Splinter Shadow, the dog pet's reaction. When hit by a melee attack that doesn't deal radiant damage, it splinters off to spawn an extra version of itself, so over the course of multiple turns, your dogs will multiply and attach even more omens to enemies that you can then pop to regain even more sorcery points as you go. It also has enhanced dark vision through Eyes of the Dark, and gets darkness as part of the subclass too. It's definitely a funky playstyle. It's very unique compared to every other sorcerer subclass that exists, and definitely worth checking it out if you like the sound of it here. Next up then in 4th place we have the Barbarian's new subclass, Path of Giants. This one is just pure fun. Your rage also makes you increase in size with this. At level 5 you start kicking people around the battlefield as a bonus action. At level 6 you gain elemental damage on your weapon and make it immediately reappear in your hand when thrown, and then at level 10 you can throw a medium or smaller creature as a bonus action. So basically you'll be built to kick people off of like cliffs into environmental deaths, throw weapons at people which will then just reappear in your hands, and that's already a really strong playstyle in the game anyways, or literally just throwing people around because you can. This subclass is hilarious, but also has a really high potential for potency too. Then up to 3rd place, let's talk about the Wizard and the Bladesinging subclass. This is your classic battle mage melee spellcaster. You gain proficiency with various melee weapons, and you build blade song damage charges by casting spells, and healing charges by hitting with your weapon, and then you can use Blade Song Climax to burst out a bunch of both damage and healing, expending defending these charges that you built. Aside from this, you also get the Martial class additional attack at level 6, as well as Song of Defense at level 10, which lets you use spell slots to lower your damage taken during Blade Song. You also gain AC and movement speed while Blade Song is active. Altogether, it just gives you a really honestly solid and competent melee subclass, while also leaving you with access to the base class kit of the wizard itself and the majority of the spells in the game as a result of that. And second, then we've got the Warlock with the Hexblade subclass. This gives you essentially innate Pact of the Blade when you get the subclass, giving magical damage to your weapon, giving you proficiency with the weapon if you didn't already have it, letting you use Charisma for your attack modifier on the weapon instead of Strength or Dexterity, which is of course quite important for Warlock, and then also a chance to apply Hexblade's Curse on hit with that weapon, which gives damage rolls against the target a bonus equal to the target's proficiency. As well, this reduces the target number you need to roll to have a critical hit by 1, which is quite strong of an effect in itself too. As if that wasn't enough, when a target dies with this curse active, you regain health on top of that. This can also be cast by itself as a bonus action once per short rest, and then at higher levels you also unlock the Accursed Spectre, which lets you raise an ally from a corpse that had your curse on it before it died, with various versions depending on the size of the target corpse that you pick. And then at level 10 you get a 50% chance to just fully ignore damage done to you by targets that have this curse on them. This is just an extremely well-rounded subclass. It's great offensively, it's good defensively, tons of value, great actual progression too with when you hit the various upgrades, and a lot of power potential in pretty much any combat scenario in the game. Then finally, in first place, I've got Circle of Stars Druid, and this one is just really neat, honestly. You gain Starry Form as a wild shape replacement, which lets you choose between 3 different constellations. The Archer constellation lets you cast Luminous Arrow as a bonus action while in the form for ranged radiant damage. Chalice constellation lets you cast Chalice Healing as a bonus action to heal yourself or other targets within reach, and then Dragon constellation as the final choice lets you cast Dazzling Breath as a bonus action to deal radiant damage in a cone shape in front of you, and this one also lets you keep concentration on a spell even when you fail the saving throw. All 3 of these then are good in their own right. They're good situationally based on what you need. Dragon Starry Form is especially good, and the fact that you have the variety between them is already incredible. But then at further levels you gain the ability to either increase or decrease attack rolls, saving throws, or ability checks, and at level 10 the damage and healing of these spells from each Starry Form is increased, with the Dragon form also giving you the ability to fly while it's active as an extra bonus. As well, you get Star Maps as a bonus resource that lets you cast extra guiding bolts without costing a spell slot, replenished on long rest. All in all, the variety of situational uses combined with the general level of power across this makes this subclass pretty exceptional. The class fantasy is also on point, and it provides something that is definitely unique within the game too. That just about does it for today then, everyone. All 12 new subclasses that will be added to Baldur's Gate 3 with Title Update 8, with the caveat that all of this information is from the pre-release testing that's been done, so bits of it are going to be subject to change. Balancing could occur, but this is how everything stands as of right now, and all of my opinions on it all too. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.